So you're saying I'm motivated in two different ways. On the one hand, I want to have more of a value in my life. So I'm motivated towards a value. Often even more important, I'm also motivated like getting away from a certain thing. And these are anti-values.
Correct. So coaches are almost programmed to focus on the positive and to look towards the good. I think it's a mistake. Nobody would want $1 million or €1 million or pounds if they couldn't do anything with it. Well, why? It's just going to fill up space. So it can't be the money. It's got to be the thing that money gives you that's the real value.
And how would I work with this now?
I'll make it as a coach, light the spark inside, empower every soul to turn the tide. I'll make it as a coach, help others grow, changing lives with every story I know.
What's going on if we deeply disagree with how another person is doing something? Or if we or our clients are torn between two different options and really can't decide? My guest today would say these are both external or internal value conflicts. I'm talking to Tim Brownson, a coach nowadays known as the Fully Booked Coach, and who you encounter as a very vocal voice on many coaching subreddits. This is where I originally met him. And who has also been working with value since already the mid-2000s. He turned his value coaching approach into a practical framework, which he calls the Clarity Method. Today, we'll unpack the Clarity Method step by step, from identifying a client's values to using Tim's ranking mechanism to get to a values hierarchy, and then using that in order to spot and resolve value conflicts. Our conversation is quite hands-on for the most part. I'm sharing my screen here and there, so feel free to take out your phone to follow along. And at the same time, you can also just follow on audio. We'll also look at the philosophy of values, why this method has produced more breakthroughs, according to Tim, than anything else he has tried in 20 plus years as a coach, and why bringing values into coaching conversations has become even more relevant in the last years. So let's go. You've written a book which is called The Clarity Method. You wrote it already in 2019, and I guess the work behind the book is even much further back, I can imagine. And yet this is sort of now a reappearing theme.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, how did you originally get to write a book about values?
Right. So I became a life coach. I did my training back in 2005 and moved to the US in February 2006 and started my life coaching practice, which is still there. daringadventure.com is still there. And so people can see I was blogging from 2006. And when I did my training, we talked about values, and the method I was taught with values is good, but I didn't feel it was quite good enough, which I don't mean to seem arrogant with that. I thought it could be tweaked and improved on. So I did that and developed a method of my own and incorporated anti-values, which I feel sure you're going to come on to. And then I wrote the book. I actually wrote the book, The Clarity Method, in 2012, but it wasn't called The Clarity Method. It was called Aligning with Your Core Values, which kind of sucks. And it was really just for clients. So it was a self-development book. I started thinking, why have I stopped doing values with clients? I just thought, well, they don't really need values. And I started thinking, actually, values are a crucial part of your messaging and to a certain extent, position as well. I thought, this is ridiculous. So I started reintroducing values, and then along came AI, and they became even more important because they fundamentally what separates us from AI.
So if I'm trying to paraphrase a bit, what I hear is you originally found values a great instrument also for coaches to help them understand who they are and how they want to position themselves.
Initially, it was for coaches or it's for my clients as a life coach to help my clients. So I would do the process with my clients when I was life coaching people, and it would give me just an insane amount of breakthroughs. The values will give me more breakthroughs than everything else. And I've done lots of training. I've done 40 days of NLP. I've done hypnotherapy, all sorts of workshops. you can put those all together, and they didn't give me the amount of breakthroughs that I got using values, to the point where occasionally it would cut the coaching short because we'd satisfied the need of the client.
Can you describe a bit more the sort of breakthroughs you got there?
Yeah. So the values is really weird. Most people don't know what their own values are. We tend to think, or people in the coaching arena tend to think that people know this stuff, but they really don't. I mean, I learned about values for the first time, age, I think it was 42, on that training. Actually, that's not true. I'd had a little bit of an introduction in work in the corporate setting very shortly before I left my job. So I'll use myself as an example. I worked in sales. When I went up the ladder into more corporate sales and bigger deals, I always felt uncomfortable. I've moved from job to job and earned a lot of money, but something just didn't feel right. I just didn't like it. Then when I first did my own values, or it was done on me in the training, integrity came out in the top 3. And then it was like, holy crap, yeah, that's why I was uncomfortable in sales. The sales industry has had an integrity bypass operation at some point, especially with bigger organizations. I'm sure there are ethical sales businesses, but I never worked for one after about 1990, I don't think. So then it was like, wow, I never knew that. What would I have done with that information when I was in sales? Probably got out sooner, or made a concerted effort to find a company that I felt aligned with my values. So that's the kind of thing that I have when clients are like, wow, that's why I'm not happy in this job. That's why I don't like that person, or I can't get on with that person. I'm always bickering. That's why I should decide to do X rather than Y. So it just gives clarity. I mean, that's why it's called the clarity method. I actually didn't come up with the title. Somebody who read the book said you should call it the clarity method. So that's exactly what it does. It makes you understand your own behaviors and those of your clients as well, because as coaches, we want to understand the clients as much as we can.
Yeah, so I guess understanding your own behavior, looking backwards, and then also, of course, giving you clarity for what that means moving forward.
Right, exactly. So again, I think that it doesn't have to be for career choices, but that's the most obvious way to use them and can give the greatest benefit. I mean, I've been hired by people just for that. I'm not quite sure how they knew we could use it for that. They probably told me at the time, but I'm going back over 10 years now. But it can, have a massive effect with that.
Then I'd love to get a bit into the weeds. To get started, can you walk us through the clarity method on a high level?
Yeah, I can. It's really a 3-stage process. The first stage is thinking about our values, because a lot of people just don't think about them because they're just there. It's like we don't think about gravity. It's kind of just there. So thinking about what's really important to you, what are the things that are non-negotiable? So, for example, for me, it is integrity. Anything I get really frustrated with ChatGPT for making crap up, making stories up. It'll start doing me a post, and it'll say, I was working with a client last week that said this. I'm like, no, the client didn't say that. That didn't happen. I don't want to, anything I put in, if I say I've got 2 places left on a mastermind, it's because I've got 2 places. So think about what's non-negotiable for you. That's the first part. The second part is the forming that hierarchy. So I work with 8. I know some people who do values work with fewer. I think anything less than 5, you're just rolling the dice, because those values lower down are still super important and they can conflict with higher ones, or you just may not notice problems. And then the third part is understanding value conflicts. So that's external and internal. External are kind of what we spoke about with a job, with people. There's a lot of societal value conflicts kicking on at the moment, and just giving that understanding. And then internal value conflicts, for the most part, are when we have a value but we don't practice it. So, and we just feel that sense of this doesn't feel right, and that can often come as a gut feeling, and we're not quite sure what it is, but aligning with our own core values. Now, it's not always possible. Yeah, your number one value may be freedom, and your number two value could be adventure, and your number three value, freedom at three, and say family at number one. So, and then you get the opportunity to go backpacking to Peru in South America for 6 months and write reports for an online publication. You've got a problem there because yes, the adventure and the freedom makes you want to do that, but sitting above that is family. Are you really going to leave your family for the next 6 months? And the answer is probably not. And that creates this really difficult situation. Now, knowing there's a value conflict doesn't make it go away, but it gives you the ability to deal with it and understand what's going on and make decisions based on that. And I would say to any client, well, I wouldn't, because I wouldn't advise clients, obviously, but do you really want to do that? You probably don't. It's probably going to cause a lot of friction and make you feel crap. You're probably going to be missing your family after 2 days.
So that is where really the rubber hits the road, kind of the conflict part. Yeah. Okay, but before we get to values conflict, you said step number one is thinking about what's important to you. And then secondly, listing that down and ranking those as actual value words, right? So I also did the clarity method for myself in a sort of self-coaching process following your book. And maybe we can use my example to recap what I experienced here. And we have this nice tool, MetaFox Online, a coaching platform where I was able to work with our own values cards. So my thinking process started a bit like this, where I would have a bunch of value words. So I think in total we have 80 here. And I was just scrolling up and down. For me, it wasn't the very first time I was thinking about this process, but
right.
It gave me an idea. What can I pick here? And so then I selected a bunch. I said, okay, yes, this one and maybe that one. And I ended up with a bunch of cards, with a bunch of value words that we can all see here on the board. And I noticed that some of them are very similar. So the first thing that I did was that I clustered them in a way. So we had like this making a difference, responsibility, stewardship, which kind of for me was pointing all in the same direction, kind of making a contribution to the world. And then this other bubble that I created here was all about creating things. Design is something I've always enjoyed doing. So there comes this appreciation for beauty, but also simply the joy of creating something that wasn't there before. And then I had this notion of belonging. So I put the friendship card here, but I think what it is, if I were to phrase it as a need, and maybe we can also look at that in a bit, like what is the difference actually between a value and a need. But I put this here as sort of a representative of this connection. Yeah. And then I also found curiosity, efficiency, personal growth, very important. And proactiveness could also be related to the responsibility. So I think responsibility is a nice one because for me, it can go either outward, kind of taking responsibility, giving back to the world, but it can also be sort of being proactive about my own life, taking responsibility for myself.
Just if I can just dive in there a second,
yes,
please, Tobias. So I said they're the 3 stages and they are, but what I will do with every client before I move from stage 1, which they've largely done on their own before the call, into stage 2 of ordering the hierarchy, is have them explain to me what that word means to them. So I can see a word like freedom, and to me, that means what I've got at the moment, which is seeing clients when I want, taking the dogs out when I want, relatively financially independent. So doing, I wouldn't say what I want when I want, because I think that's probably largely impossible for all but the super rich for the large part. So we have to understand as coaches what that word means to the client. Otherwise, we put our definition on it and we could be way off base. Somebody else may just mean freedom of financial freedom, or they meant freedom from other people, never wanted to get married, or that kind of thing. So we're locked into our own reason and we think we know what other people mean. It's like, we see the colour red. We think everybody else is seeing the same colour as us, but we've actually literally no way of knowing that because they've always called that the colour they're seeing red. So that's important. Now, if you're doing it on your own, you know what you mean. So that's absolutely fine. And you can definitely cluster them like that. You just have to be aware, would there ever be a time where, I think it was creativity and beauty, could there be a time where you're being creative, but you're making something that's ugly, but it's super creative? Now, again, that you define beauty, so it may be beautiful to you because it's some, I don't know, an algorithm, for example. They're not exactly beautiful things, but beauty can come out of that. You can get very sort of flexible with the meaning of words because it's only important to you for the large part, and that people around you, I guess.
Yeah, people, we can get a bit more abstract on that, but maybe let's say we are in this coaching conversation and I am a client coming to you now. Look, Tim, I did my homework. This is my values that I came up with. How would the conversation go? Where would you dig in now?
I'd say, let's take friendship because it's going to be the easiest one to do, not because you can't do the same process with I'd say, what does friendship mean to you?
I think I define it here for myself in a much more encompassing way. So it's not only about friendship with friends, but I think I would even put belonging to my family there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, friendship has this notion of knowing I belong, knowing I have somebody I can come to, and also knowing I am there for other people, right? So this kind of goes both ways. And this, gives me an incredible amount of meaning. Hard to even explain how that actually looks like.
Right. And when you go so far down that people are struggling to explain it with other words, you're at a core value then. So I would say, whether I'd say this to a client, I'm not sure. It would depend on the client. I would say that the real value there is connection and not friendship, because friendship's just a part of connection. Because you mentioned family and stuff like that, where you wouldn't typically think of that as friendship, although of course you can. Yeah, my wife's my best friend as well. So I think connection is the thing, because you can feel connected to other people without necessarily being friends with them. I feel connected to other Derby County supporters or LA Rams supporters. I feel connected to people who are bald and 63, maybe not, so we can feel connected to people without even knowing them. So I think connection is the value there.
Yeah. Yeah. And this reminds me of another example you give in your book, right? Where you say, when people come to you and say money is a value, then you would also kind of dig in. Is it really money? Like, what is behind that? What can you do? What does money give you? And then you would dig in there.
Yeah, because money is never a value, because it's always the thing that people gain from money that's the real value. So that could be security, which is a dubious value because it's out of our control to a large part. It could be the freedom that we talked about, financial freedom. It could be any number of things. So what I would say, well, what does money give you?
And that is not even about money and what it represents. It is about, we're not dug deep enough yet. Like, there is something behind the person saying money. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think nobody would want $1 million or €1 million or pounds if they couldn't do anything with it. You can't spend it, you can't invest it, you can't give it away. What do you want it? Well, why? It's just going to fill up space. So it can't be the money. It's got to be the thing that money gives you that's the real value.
And I was wondering the same thing when I looked at the value making a difference. We have that in the card set.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking, is that really already the core, or is there something more behind? Like, what would you say if you see that making a difference? Because obviously that is not on your list of values that you provide in the book.
No, it's not. And it's something I see quite often, because a lot of coaches get in, very few, contrary to popular opinion, very few coaches get in it to make a lot of money. That's just not the norm. So with making a difference, I would say, well, how do you feel if you make a difference?
I feel like I'm giving back.
Mhm.
And just looking at the my board here with values, I'm wondering if it kind of goes back to the connection already, because
Yeah.
making a difference and giving back, that already makes me again feel connected to the area, to the person, to the people I'm making a difference for. So I'm wondering if that is even connected. I'm putting it here also with stewardship together, because I think it's also related to taking care of what I've given responsibility for.
Mm.
And in a way, I think you could also interpret that relatively abstract, like having good education, having enough money, kind of it comes with a responsibility of also taking care for kind of broader society, the environment, etc.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I guess making a difference, it sort of sits between this connection, where does the difference happen, and this stewardship. Unless you also challenge me now on the stewardship and you would ask what is behind there.
Well, I might do. I might also ask for examples of where, but you gave me a couple there with the environment and because you've got a young family, making sure they get good education, etc. So I think I would roll with that. You know what you mean by it. I now know what you mean by it. There may come a time where I could ask you as your coach, what is that making a difference? I'm trying to think of are there any opportunities or not opportunities? Could there be any instances where, say, responsibility and making a difference conflict? Maybe there's something that's responsible for your family, but it doesn't make a difference or stops you from making a difference, and you've got to have that conversation then. But I think those things, for the large part, for the most time, would sit together nicely, and I wouldn't have a problem. I just think, okay, well, stewardship's important as well, responsibility. I mean, it does sometimes. I do get some clients that will send me the list back, and each one's got about 4 in it, and it makes the process really long, and it almost feels like people are scared of pushing a value away, which they're not. Now quite frequently I'll hear clients say, I can't believe that's at the bottom of my list. Well, it isn't. But, you've got scores of values. We're looking at the top 8. This is looking like the section, the top 4 in the Premier League, and saying the 4th team's bottom. Well, no, it's the top 4. So it's not a question of pushing anything away. It's a question of figuring out which are the most important. And by the way, something else I would explain to clients before or after I've done the process. There is no one set hierarchy. I'm talking about the hierarchy, but our values fluctuate, that they will move around. The older we get, the less they tend to move, is my experience, but they will move. They will change within, with life situations. I frequently see or don't see health on clients' list and nothing even related to health. I can guarantee you, if they got a serious medical diagnosis, health would suddenly be maybe at number 1. So they will move. World events at the moment will be causing some people's values to fluctuate. They'll suddenly realize, actually, this is more important to me. This is higher up. And under normal circumstances, maybe they wouldn't have considered that. So we're looking to get a rough idea. Not say, okay, this is nailed on, this is your top value. You can never do anything that misaligns you with that value. Yeah, there may be circumstances when you have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, this really resonates maybe with a slightly similar example. Like if I look back at the last year, I had this, what I realized of becoming a father, that's what happened in my personal life in the broad strokes in the last year. And all of a sudden, I became much more interested in the amounts of money we make month on month at Nitafox, and then I was having a much closer look there. So this value, I think in our card set, we have the value of financial stability here. And Max, my co-founder, also said, hey, Toby, you seem to be much more interested in this now, while usually I would sort of lean on him to have a good grip on the numbers in the business. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a bit similar to your example that you're giving. Like as soon as health, like it's so foundational, we take it for granted. And I would say also financial stability is super foundational. And to some extent, I take it for granted, but then it pops up basically when there's a reason to.
Yeah, and if something went wrong with the business, it will become even more important when you've got other people to care for as well. So we just have to be aware of that. I always encourage clients, look at the list, maybe print it off, throw it in a drawer, forget about it. But if something suddenly pops into your head, go back to it and think, okay, does that need to be in the list now? And then I ask them just to update me, just to send me. And sometimes people will make changes the day after because they've had a chance to step away from it and think about, what, that is really important. One other thing I'll always do, Toby, is with a lot of people, if they don't have family on the list, at the end of it, I'll go back and say, what's more important to you? Let's suppose in number 8 is creativity. So what's more important to you, family or creativity? And they'll always say, well, obviously it's family. Now, some people, and with you've got it under connection, so I wouldn't do that. So you've already told me that. But a lot of people forget about family because it's just a given. And that's even more so from certain cultures or certain regions. Certainly, Italy, some of the southern Mediterranean countries, family is first. Spain to a certain extent as well. India, I mean, all their family all live together for the most part. Retirement homes just didn't exist until relatively recently. So family there, it's going to be. But I need to know that. Maybe it isn't. Maybe they've fallen out with the family. They can't stand the family. So that's possible. So I will always ask the question. Plus, I may ask the question about health as well. Not as frequently as I will with family. Yeah. And it is common for people to forget about it.
Yeah. Okay. To make some progress now, and I think you already gave some teasers now. You were mentioning the list and ranking a bunch of times, and that is also what sort of would be next in this process, right? Like I did some brainstorming. We dug into what do these different words actually mean to me as a client, and now you came up with a ranking system that seems relatively wild at first glance.
Yes.
It's sort of an algorithm, but I think it's actually really surprisingly intuitive and easy once you get the grasp.
Yeah.
And you provide this template here, right? And we have this table.
Yeah.
Which I filled now with my values. And you could see here, okay, I put the personal growth happens to be first now here in the list, then the creativity, the positive impact contribution. That's what I made about the making a difference value. Responsibility. I sort of created a new word there because I like the ability of being responsive. And then we have the connection, friendship, family value. And what I would do then is I would compare every item on the list with every other item, right? So I started here in the top and I said personal growth. So number 1, it just has the numerical value 1 assigned here. And I compare number 1 versus number 2. So personal growth versus creativity. Okay, I decide personal growth is more important. Then I do personal growth versus number 3, that is positive impact. Okay, I say the positive impact is more important. Mm-hmm. And so on and so forth, right? That's how I go through the list, comparing personal growth versus creativity, personal growth versus positive impact, personal growth versus responsibility, etc. And whenever I say, okay, it's this number, I make a circle around it. Mm-hmm. And then what I would do at the end of this process, I would count the number of encircled ones. So personal growth has 4 circles, so it gets a score of 4. Creativity has also 4 circles, so it also gets a score of 4, and so on and so forth. And that's how I end up a hierarchy here where I have responsibility at my top, and then second space is shared by creating, creativity, connection. Then we have personal growth, the contribution, curiosity, authenticity, and efficiency at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Right. So a couple of things. First of all, let me go back to why I do it like this and why I just don't say to a client, okay, order them yourself. So when I go through a list and say, okay, Toby, what's more important to you, personal growth or creativity creation? I want you to give me an immediate response. I don't want you to think about it. I don't want you to rationalize it, because again, you end up with a list of things that you think you should have. Now, the opposite end of the scale from woo-woo. I am very science driven, but values are a little bit woo-woo because you can't pin them down. Philosophers have been debating values and what they mean and their importance since the dawn of time. But I want to ask people, when I go through the process, what's more important to me, and get that instant response, because we all have gut responses. Now, you can look at a gut response as being, you know what, it's just a feeling. It's just, I don't even know what it is, because the unconscious mind doesn't communicate in language like the conscious mind does. So everybody watching this will have had some occurrence in their life where afterwards they've said, I knew I shouldn't have done that, or I knew I should do that, because they'd have had that gut response. And because it doesn't communicate in language, it's just that, a gut response. It just, I don't know what that means. It could be something important, or it could be because I overdid the 5-alarm chili last night. And there is something called the enteric highway, the gut brain axis. And we know, because I'm a research scientist, they know that in the gut, there are way too many neurons, and there's too much in there just to digest food and to do what we think it's typically there to do. And we know that it communicates with the brain. So ignoring that, I mean, your gut instinct can be wrong, but for the most part, it tends to be right. So if I bat through the process quickly with a client, then the response I get is more likely to be right. And that's borne out by the fact that quite often at the end, people will say, oh, wow, I'm surprised that's at number 1, but yeah, it should be, or at number 5, or I'm surprised that's lower than it is. So if I'd have asked them to do it themselves, it wouldn't have been. We'd have ended up with a list of what they think you should have, what they'd analysed and figured out. Now, there's no problem using analytical thought at the beginning, like you did. But with this, we want to move through it quickly. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, if I've got 2 the same, I will separate them, because say, look at curiosity and authenticity. If when you asked yourself what's more important to you, curiosity or authenticity, you marked curiosity. So in a head-to-head, you went for curiosity. So I would rank that a little bit. Now, does it really matter? We're dealing in tiny amounts here, and it could fluctuate, as I spoke about before. It possibly doesn't, but I will do that. Now, you can get 3 the same. You can actually get 4 the same. It doesn't happen very often. Once I get 3, I'm not going to separate them, because you just get in the circle that A is more important than B, B is more important than C, but C is more important than A.
So yeah, I could basically change the order of my ranking, and I'm just doing that actually. Here you said, okay, I compared number 7, curiosity, versus number 8, authenticity. So now I would put curiosity first, authenticity next, and then finally we have efficiency. And now this would become my actual final rank without different values sharing the same spot.
Right. And how does that feel to you?
Yeah, pretty cool. It's very, especially the top, I would even say it's great fun to look at. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's
and the thing is with values, because there are values, well, everybody thinks their values are great. If they didn't, they're not your values. Because they're super important to us and they're personal to us. So we think, yeah, we've got good values.
To finish that up, so we went through step 1. That was I collected my values. We debated a bit, how do we actually define those different words? What does friendship or making a difference actually mean to me? Now we use your ranking algorithm to come up with a ranked values list. And now I think another major element, and also I would say an innovation you have contributed here, is anti-values.
Yes.
You provide a list
Yes.
in your
Yes.
book of anti-values. So I have a list here that says aggression, anger, anxiety, apathy, arrogance, conflict, contempt, cynicism, depth, dishonesty, disgust, etc. Words that make it much more easy to say, no, I don't want this in my life
Yes.
than I want it. And how would I work with this now? Or how would you work with a client now here?
For the most part, we're just as driven by the things we don't want and want to avoid as the things that we do want. So coaches are almost programmed to focus on the positive and to look towards the good. I think it's a mistake. We need to be aware. So for me, when I was a salesperson, I was much more driven by not being near the bottom of a sales league than I was a desire to be near the top. Now, the net result is the same. If I'm nowhere near the bottom, then I'm nearer the top. But it was that fear of missing goals that really motivated me. So as coaches, we need to know what's going to motivate people. And these can be super motivated. So I would ask, which is worse for you? Now, with values, it can be a little bit murkier because they can be a lot more nebulous and esoteric, maybe, than core values. People think core values, I know what that means. But for example, with arrogance, okay, that's anti-value for you. And if it's, say, the top of your list, it doesn't matter anywhere. It could be, that will explain to you why maybe you don't like somebody. That will explain to you why maybe you don't gel with that business. Well, that person's arrogant and that business is arrogant. So if we don't know that, we can think, hang on a minute, that business does line up with some of my values, but I just get this feeling that I don't like them. Well, that could be the reason that there's some anti-values that are really, really pushing you and influencing your emotions, thoughts, behavior, etc. So, and I was introduced to these during some NLP training, not quite like this, but then I started thinking, hang on, I feel like we've got just one side of the coin here with what people want. What do people want to avoid, which can be just as important? Because, evolutionarily speaking, it was much more important for us to pay attention to something in the grass because it might kill us and it might be something to eat. So we are hardwired to be aware of danger and the things that we don't want. I'm not saying some of these things necessarily are dangerous, like jealousy, but we've still got that sort of prehistoric hardwiring in us to avoid things.
Yeah, so you're saying I'm motivated in two different ways. On the one hand, I want to have more of a value in my life. So I'm motivated towards a value, but often even more important, I'm also motivated getting away from a certain thing. And these are anti-values.
Correct. So for me, stress is important. So when I was in sales, I was stressed to death most of the time. It was just a very intense industry in corporate sales. And that was a big driving force of me becoming a coach because I wanted to have that freedom. So my stress, now I almost never get stressed. So I've eradicated that from my life, but I'm aware of it. I will do what I can to avoid that.
So we have this set of anti-values that we want to understand. What are we motivated to get away from? And how does that look like in the values coaching process? Would I just do the same process? So I would also sort of make my list and then apply the ranking mechanism to understand these are my top anti-values. Would you actually do that with a client?
Correct. Yeah. Yes, it's exactly the same. But I would ask the question, which is worst for you? Not which do you prefer. So then at the end, I'd have a list like you had with your core values, with the one that scored the highest being the most important thing that we need to avoid.
Like when I originally did my values list, authenticity, for example, wasn't on there. It didn't come up when I was looking at the values cards.
Okay.
But then when I looked at your list of anti-values, I found arrogance there. And I was like, arrogance? Yeah, I want to put that on my list of anti-values. But what does that actually mean if I look at the other side of the coin, and then I realized, maybe I should have authenticity on my list of values. So by looking at the anti-values, I was also realizing, not wanting arrogance or hypocrisy or these things, that brought me then to actually putting authenticity on the list of values.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I don't remember anybody saying that before, but it's an interesting way to look at it.
If we go back to our values coaching process, earlier when we started this conversation, you gave me like this 3-step process in a way. You said we start by thinking about values, brainstorming them, clarifying personal definition. Secondly, we would sort of go through this listing and ranking process. So I come up with my hierarchy of 8 top values. And as a third step, you said you would clarify internal and external value conflicts. Yeah. Can we talk a bit about that? How does that look like? What is an internal and an external value conflict?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on it in a certain extent. It's client specific as well. It depends. Certainly, as a life coach, it depends why a client came to me. If they came to me because they wanted to move jobs, for example, they're unhappy in their role, then I would do the explanation based on that. So an external value conflict can be anything at an individual level, right the way up to societal level. So if you think about, or anybody thinks about people they dislike, there's certainly a value conflict. So I find it really difficult to like people who lack integrity. It's just an instant, I'm not interested if you're doing that. And that's why I will call people out. It's not necessarily smart to do that, but it's just the way I feel. So, and they can be obviously in the workplace, it can be with the business. It can just be the business where you got a values conflict. So by you putting your values on your website and directing applicants to them, you're trying to avoid a value conflict further down the road. So, and like I say, I will look at a client's different areas where there may be value conflicts, external, internal value conflicts. I explained the one way you can have values conflict on the same side with freedom, adventure, and family. But also, it's a value if we're not in alignment with our own value, if there's something that we really believe in, but we're not practicing it. So if I'm doing things that I know are going to stress me, that's a value conflict. If I did something that I thought was dishonest, that's a value conflict. And that's going to create internal stress. That's going to make you just feel, this doesn't feel good. So I'm definitely looking for that with clients. And values go both ways as well. So if I've got a client, it's quite frequent to have either kindness or compassion on the list. Well, that doesn't just go outwards to avoid a value conflict. It goes internal as well. So if you're not being compassionate with you and kind to yourself, and most people aren't, as a client, I'm going to call you out on that. That needs to be addressed. And most people have done that throughout their life. And it's so ingrained in their behavior and the way they think about themselves that it can be really difficult to step into those negative feels like, I'm an idiot, I suck, why did I do that? Nobody likes me, I'll never make a go of this. That sort of language that can be really pernicious to step in and halt that. And the first part is recognizing it. Some people don't recognize it. So does that explain sort of internal value? They're a little bit trickier to spot and to rectify, but they're there.
Yeah, in a way, what I hear is value conflicts is also where the rubber hits the road, in the sense that this is where this connects with the actual client issue, right? Because maybe a client says, I'm really unhappy at my company, I'm considering leaving, and I don't really know, and I don't have the clarity. And so that's where you bring up values as a theme, because you suspect there's an external value conflict between his values and the company values, or the values of colleagues, the boss, etc. Or vice versa, maybe there's like a very tough decision that I need to make about maybe pursuing a ambitious role which would mean I have to move countries, and I really want to do it. but I also don't want to do it because of my family, etc. So that points towards an internal value conflict, because maybe there's both the value of ambition and family, and then you have these sort of conflicts.
Yeah, and there can be like the Venn diagram where they sort of tend to overlap, and it just gets a bit of a grey area. It feels wrong, but it is wrong when you look externally as well. But yeah, that's exactly it.
Anyway, so in a way, the clarifying the conflict could also be in the beginning of this whole process, but it's more of a suspicion of yours. Then you pull out the values method from your toolbox to make this conflict more explicit, understandable, visible, and resolvable, possibly.
Yeah. Well, I will always do this. I will always do values. Well, I say always, almost always do it in the second session with a client. So the first session is like onboarding, getting a full understanding, background of different elements of their life, because we're very poor as human beings at compartmentalizing. So if you're having problems at work, that's often going to leak into your home life and your social life, etc. So I will do that first session. Second session, I will do values. So I want the values to be the basis of what we do moving forward. And I will still do that with coaching clients now, because not only do I get to understand that client better, but they get to understand themselves better, which can be just as important. And then those values are going to feed into their marketing, because often it's something that coaches don't implement or just don't understand a lot of the time, don't realize.
Okay, great. Maybe a few closing questions on the philosophy of values here. You said values, they are the most transformational or most breakthrough prone tool.
Yes.
I had similar experience with using strengths. They also help in a way to give that clarity, understanding who I am. How would you differentiate values maybe versus strengths versus needs also? Like with some of the value words we looked at, I also thought, is this connection, is this a value of me or is this a need? Like, do you make a difference, or is that all just mental construction that's not really helpful? How do you look at these different definitions of working with these terms?
Well, values and needs, I think that particular Venn diagram again is almost an eclipse. So I think they're almost the same thing. And I'll be honest with you, Toby, I've never sat down to think about, where are the differences? Maybe there are some, but intuitively, I think they're probably the same thing. Strength is a different animal altogether. And I know some coaches use strengths finders and they specialize in that, and that's fine. But we can have strengths that are not, I could be a fantastic liar, and that's a strength. Well, that impacts on my integrity. I could be a very good writer of prose and that doesn't use humor. But if I think of something stupid to throw in there, I want to do that, but that could be a strength. So strengths are useful to know. And obviously the sweet spot is when the strength is or it overlaps entirely with a value. So I personally never did any strengths work with clients, but I think it can be a useful thing. But I think it's a problem when you only do strengths and you push on using those strengths and thinking this is what somebody should be doing, a client should be doing, when it contradicts their values. Because we can be good at loads of things that aren't necessarily value aligned. So that would be my concern. If you marry the two together, fantastic.
Yeah, I think so. And I think also modern interpretations of strength psychology, they also take that into account by looking at what are you naturally drawn to, what gives you energy. And I would say, if you ask these questions, for example, we also came up with a strengths discovery tool that asks exactly these questions.
Right.
And I think then you have a high overlap with values also, like valuing curiosity, openness, that I would say makes you naturally drawn to and makes you being energized by exploring new themes in a conversation, etc., learning new things. And that translates then in the strength of maybe curiosity, learning, these sorts of things.
Right, I fully agree. But for me, so I have to keep going back to integrity because it's the easiest one for me to explain. I don't know if I'm drawn to integrity. So is it a strength of mine? I don't know if I would think about that as a strength. So I think there are things, family. If you want to have closer relationships with your family, but the reality of it is you're working too much. So is your wife. She's not spending the time with your baby as that you would like. So, it may be that it's actually not a strength of yours, but you would like to make it a strength. So whether that's being drawn to it or not, I don't know. But I think it's easy still to miss some important values. And to do this process takes, an hour. And I think it's worth doing it along with strengths. I would do it before so you don't prime people, but I think it's useful. And to be honest with you, Toby, you're probably more knowledgeable about strengths and how it's going with psychology than I am at this point. I tend not to read about that kind of stuff anymore because there's so much going on with marketing and AI that sort of occupies most of my spare time.
Yeah. In order to close off this part, what would you tell somebody, a coach listening to this show, who is now curious, intrigued by the clarity method, by working with values? How would you recommend to get started with all of this?
My book is $9.99 on Amazon. That would be the starting point. I would say just dive in. There's a lot of information out there on values. Some of it's good, some of it's bad. I think, if anybody likes what we've talked about today, well, it's all there. We've not talked about anything that isn't in the book. Maybe I went a little bit deeper on the anti-values, but it's all, it's all there. If anybody watching this genuinely can't afford $9.99, well, I would expect that they can't afford to be a coach if they haven't got $9.99 because there's a cost to running a business. But if they genuinely can't and they want to email Tim at the Fully Booked Coach, I'll send them a free copy.
Awesome. Okay. I can fully agree. I read the book. It's amazing. Your value of humor definitely shines through. So it's not only an educational read, but also a really entertaining read. I really enjoyed the process.
Thanks.
So that, I guess, is a great starting point.
Thank you.
This is how I close my conversation about values with Tim Brownson. I had read Tim's book, The Clarity Method, during my Christmas break, during the change of years, and it really got me hooked to look into my own values and work with them this coming year. For my own sake, but also to use it in coaching conversations I have with clients and also to expand the MetaFox coaching tool suite in this direction. So if Tim and I got you curious to also look into values, we'll put a bunch of links in the show notes. Of course, Tim's book, The Clarity Method, and also the values coaching cards that I used in our demo. On the one hand, the physical card set, but also the MetaFox online coaching platform that you saw me use on the video. If you end up working with either of these, please don't hesitate to drop me a message on LinkedIn or an email to tobias@metafox.eu. I'm super curious to learn how your experience goes. That's it for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks again with Tim, sharing about his current big passion, using AI for all kinds of different coaching use cases. So if that sounds interesting, tune in again in 2 weeks. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. That helps us more than you think to get out this content for free. I'm Toby, co-founder of MetaFox, and I say all the best on your path towards becoming an impactful coach. Bye-bye.
I'll make it as a coach, light the spark inside, empower every soul to turn the tide. I'll make it as a coach, help others grow, changing lives with every story I know.